Hello, and thank you everybody for joining. Hope everyone is enjoying the gathering so far. We get to give Eric a break finally of more than 10 minutes. My name is Akash Chogli. I'm the Vice President of Americans for Prosperity, and I'm super, super excited about our conversation today, our guests. So I am going to tee it right off with Congressman Chip Roy of the great state of Texas. Who is Chip Roy and why is he in Congress?
Well, Chip Roy is Erick Erickson's dear friend, and that's why I'm here. And I am grateful to be here with Eric, although I'm closer friends with Christy. And I'd rather hang out with Christy than Eric. So wherever you are, Eric, I hope Christy will be here later because I'd rather be hanging out with her. But no, it's great to be here with so many friends. You know, I'm a congressman from Texas 21, Austin, San Antonio, the Hill Country. Family's been in Texas since the 1850s, and my great-great-grandfather was a Texas Ranger in the Hill Country there in Texas in the 1870s. I'm married to my beautiful wife, Kara. We live on 10 acres, about 20 miles southwest of Austin. I have 2 kids. They go to a classical Christian school in southwest Austin, and yeah, I'm immeasurably blessed and proud to be in Congress trying to fight to reclaim freedom.
What inspired you to run for Congress in the first place, and what do you think are the most serious things that Congress needs to get done for the country?
Yeah, well, about 12 years ago, I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that'll shift your thinking a little bit. I had a 4-month-old daughter, Virginia, my daughter, and then a not even quite 2-year-old son. And look, I was blessed. I got through the other side of that, cancer-free in a few months. MD Anderson was able to use a great trial drug at the time, but I was committed to wanting to save what I call healthcare freedom for my kids, my grandkids. That was right in the wake of Obamacare, and I knew what Obamacare was going to do to our healthcare industry, and lo and behold, that's what it's done. We could talk about that a little more, but that's probably the main driving force. Look, I was Senator Cruz's chief of staff. I'd worked in and out of politics. I'd worked for Governor Rick Perry, and I thought I was done with public service, but the good Lord has a funny way of telling you you've got something else to go do. And Lamar Smith announced his retirement, and so I ran for Congress. And now I get to beat my head against a brick wall for a living.
When I do events like this, I like to say that we live there, so you don't have to, right? Most folks have to worry about what's going on in Washington. People like Chip Roy are the reason you don't have to worry sometimes about what folks are doing in Washington. It seems like you've been at the center of every single fight that's happened in Congress this year, literally from day one, right? The fight over the speakership, the debt ceiling, what have you. You are as conservative as anybody in Congress, but you actually get things done. What is your approach in Congress? I mean, what kind of shapes your thinking about how you fight, how things get done, and how you get conservative legislation across the finish line?
I just think you have to be true to yourself. I was meeting with a candidate in East Texas last night in Tyler at a Grassroots event. He's getting ready to run for office, and he was talking about, well, what do I do with this? I've got a donor, and they think I might be too conservative, and this person, well, maybe I might be too not conservative enough because I'm talking this. I said, stop with all that. Yeah. Like, why are you running? Go do that. People are tired of all the games, right? So you just be honest. I will go do events, help my colleagues that I disagree with, and go sit down, have a beer with them, but I'll punch them in the nose tomorrow if I think they're wrong on policy. Yeah. Because we're not there to make nice and make friends and hang out in the swamp. So for me, effectiveness is about taking the fight that I ran on and actually trying to go execute on it. So take, for example, right now, we're going to head into September, and the the funding of government will end on September 30th. And I don't know everybody in this room. I know some, but I can promise you that pretty much everyone in this room agrees with me that it would be absurd to take another taxpayer dollar or another borrowed dollar on October 1st to continue the status quo under a continuing resolution of 2023 spending levels to fund a DHS. That's right. To fund a DHS that's at war with the people of Texas and this whole country, to fund a DOJ that's at war with the rule of law, to fund an incompetent Department of Defense that is driving away people from recruiting because it's woke. The American people didn't send us there for that. And conservatives go out and run on all this stuff, and then they don't do it. Yeah. So for me, the way you're effective is be honest, go to the American people, and if my colleagues don't like it, well, then they can go answer to their constituents. That's one of my favorite complaints I get from my Republican colleagues. It says, well, you're out there saying that, we need to not fund DHS to have an open border, and they're asking me why I haven't signed a letter, and you're making it hard on me. I'm like, well, why don't you just sign the letter?
Yeah.
Or why don't you just pick your own fight? And we have to get busy fighting.
I think one of the things you've never shied away from is actually having the debate, right? Whether that's debate with the Democrats or it's a debate within the Republican conference, you're there to advance ideas, right? And so often, the only thing Congress does anymore is pass spending bills. I mean, how do you take that approach, debating with your own colleagues in the Republican conference, for one thing, when there are questions like this?
Well, I was trained up to some degree under great leaders, Governor Rick Perry, like I said. I don't always agree with Governor Perry. We have lots of festive debates on my iPhone every day, and we did when I was a staffer for him. But I would crawl over broken glass for Rick Perry because he's an exceptional human being. He's a Christian. He fought hard for the people of Texas. He helps people. He helps a lot of our veterans. Like, I know who he is. I learned from him. Know all the people you talk to. When you walk into a room, connect with somebody, right? You figure out how to engage with people in a real and human way. But let's just be clear. Everybody says, oh my gosh, you guys are so divided today. Well, when was the last time you had a Secretary of Treasury and a Vice President dueling?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that happened 220 years ago, right? I mean, we have had John Adams and Thomas Jefferson hated each other, right? But then what happened on July 4th, 1826, right? I mean, they had come together, they'd kind of rekindled their friendship. And allegedly, Adams dies saying Jefferson lives, even though in fact Jefferson had died a few hours before Adams. As I said the night after the speaker's fight, that Friday night, we had an interview, I think it was Sean Hannity, and it was, the speaker and myself and Byron Donalds and some of the 20 and Steve Scalise. And, and Sean was asking me, he goes, well, how did we get this done? And, where do we go? I said, the American people got to see an actual functioning, debating House of Representatives, and that's what they want. And they're not afraid of us breaking a little glass. They'd like to see us breaking a little glass. We made C-SPAN great again for an entire week.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was entertaining, but it was productive, right? And ultimately, the House got to move forward in a better way than it was in the past because of what you all did. You brought up a bunch of agencies, right, that are simply not working. They're not serving the interests of the American people anymore. Some of these are specific problems that the Biden administration has made worse, but some of them are actually just inherent to the federal bureaucracy, right? It's a broken system. Now, President Biden, in many ways, has weaponized the federal bureaucracy for his political allies and against his political opponents. What really, if you could sum up the harm of these overreaching agencies or incompetent agencies, what is the harm both economically to the American people, but also to our system of government?
I mean, we can't answer that question here in, 5 minutes in a lunch conversation. But what I'll say is this, and I think this is the most important takeaway, if you don't take away anything else from this conversation. In my experience, more experience than I wish I'd had at this point being in the swamp. When we have a fight about spending, yes, it's about $36 trillion in debt. Yes, it's about how much we're destroying the dollar. Yes, it's about, making each and every one of our kids and grandkids inherit all of that debt and a weaker economy as a result of it. But the truth is, the biggest scandal about all of that spending is that you're funding the very tyrants that are undermining your freedom every single day. That's what we're doing. And the question is, you're talking about the harm being done? Yeah. I mean, the obvious harm. Okay, let's take the obvious harm of the Department of Justice weaponized against a former president or weaponized against Scott Smith, a dad in Loudoun County for defending his daughter, or weaponized against Mark Houck as a father in Philadelphia who was simply defending his son and his free speech rights to go defend life. We can go down the laundry list of examples of the Department of Justice, and I'm a former assistant United States attorney. I worked with agents. I went to go prosecute bad guys. I don't have any animus towards the Department of Justice as an entity per se. But you shouldn't have an entity that is weaponized against the people it's supposed to defend and defend the rule of law to secure the blessings of liberty as the Constitution gave us. And that's fundamentally what's happening. Yeah. But that's the obvious stuff, right? The obvious stuff, the Department of Homeland Security. Right now, we're sitting in a fancy hotel in Buckhead, Atlanta. I can promise you that while we're sitting here, somewhere in Atlanta in a stash house is a little girl getting abused. That's happening right now. How do I know that? Because I got a federal judge in Fort Worth, Texas, who issued a report just 2 months ago. He happens to be a friend of mine, Reed O'Connor, who upward departed from the guidelines to punish some bad actors working for cartels who had a mom and a daughter in a stash house in Fort Worth. They were holding for ransom over the head of a guy who came here illegally and was in Baltimore, Maryland. And they were going to charge him not the $1,000 he paid to come in the country, but they said pay $23,000 or we're going to rape your daughter. That's happening in your country, in our supposedly Christian, Judeo-Christian, compassionate country. How is that the Department of Homeland Security doing its job? How is 70,000 dead Americans from fentanyl poisoning doing its job? How is lawlessness and cartels being empowered along our border and ranchers in Texas getting overrun, and videos I get every day and pictures every day I get of livestock getting out, or the tractor that got stolen from a guy who texted me just last night and his fence is now all ripped up, and all the people who are dying as a result of it, and China empowered? How is that the Department of Homeland Security doing its job? But you're paying for it, right? You're paying for those bureaucrats. You're paying for a healthcare entity with Anthony Fauci enriches himself while he forces people to lose their jobs if they don't stick a needle in their arm. That's what you're paying for, the bureaucracy. That's what the administrative state is all about. And they don't care about you. And they don't care about freedom. They care about telling you what to do. And if you didn't catch the viral video last week with Oliver Anthony, the sort of, redneck anthem, if you will, from Virginia, talking about the rich men north of Richmond, right? He's speaking to the current moment. And a lot of the Acela class elitists who write all of their highfalutin nonsense out in social media that like 12 people read, they don't get it. They don't understand it. But he does. He gets it. Because he gets that there's a bureaucratic state and a government that's at war with the people of this country, while a handful of people get enriched and the rest of the American people can't afford health care, can't send their kids to a school of their choice that they can learn that God is good and this country is good. They can't know that they're going to be able to go buy and afford a car because we're choosing to chase, unicorn energy policies that enriches China and has kids in cobalt mines getting abused. There's a war on your way of life going on by that administrative state, and you're funding it. We should end that, and not one Republican should spend $1 ever again to perpetuate it.
There are actually three things you touched on, right, that in general the administrative state is doing wrong as a result of the way things are working. One, the things they're supposed to be doing, they don't do, right, because they have had mission creep.
Yep.
Two, they are way overstepping the authority vested in them, right? That they're supposed to implement laws passed by Congress. Instead, what they have done, and this is not specific even to this administration, they are going way above and beyond what they are legally permitted to be doing, right? So they're failing at their mission. They're way outside of their mission as far as what they're doing. And the third is, not only are they, hurting the lives of small businesses and workers, they're actually protecting the entrenched class, right? You're protecting the folks who can help write the regulations and the laws and all of that. And so there's a number of things that on its face you might not see, but the problems are much, much broader than just the thing you see in the news headlines every day, which then begs the question. You bring up, funding, right? But what can we actually do? We can defund specific things that we don't like that this administration is doing. Systemically, what can conservatives or Congress do to rein in the administrative state so this problem stops for this administration, the next one, the one after that, and forever?
Well, I'm not going to move away from my spending argument in the end, but there are things like the REINS Act, which Senator Rand Paul has been advancing for a long time, and Thomas Massie in the House, that would basically say that any regulations that have an impact over $100 million would have to go to Congress for approval. We get violent opposition from our Democratic colleagues, which should tell you that it's probably a good idea. And so there are things we can do, but I tell you, the administrative state is so big and powerful, right? The Supreme Court comes in and says, hey, Mr. President, yeah, you overstepped your bounds on basically saying, sure, we're going to just forgive all these student loans. Well, what did they just do a couple days ago? They issued a whole other order, forgiving $800-something billion worth of student loans, right? They don't care about the rule of law. It's literally irrelevant to this administration and, importantly, the administrative state. And that isn't just the Biden administration. What buzzsaw do you think President Trump and the administration ran into when they got to Washington. They ran into the administrative buzzsaw. I had a friend of mine who was doing policy work for Governor Rick Perry, then Secretary of Energy Rick Perry under the administration. And there was a memorandum that had been circulating that if and they did it on purpose at the end of the Obama administration, that if you didn't sign this memo, you were basically acceding to this international agreement on climate change stuff. And it was, you know, not the big agreement, but, you know, an agreement. Well, they deep sixed it. They hid it. And the bureaucratic state that was there didn't show it to Perry and the politicals. About 2 days before it was due, they discovered this through some FOIA thing, and they had to go dig it up, find it, and then act on it within a day before the thing. That's just one example that I saw personally where they're at war with the political people who are supposed to make the decisions, because Congress has given away all of its power to the administrative state without any checks or balances, which will bring me back to funding. We can do whatever we want. We can pass all the laws in the world we want. But if we don't constrain the dollars, you're never going to choke the administrative state. You have to. The EPA was complaining, according to my friends in the Trump administration, of, quote, being traumatized by the Trump administration. To which I said, praise Jesus. Right? I want more of that. And I want every agency feeling traumatized that they don't have the funding, that they don't have to do what they want to go do. Because basically, if we could just go back to, you know, what were the four agencies, right? The Secretary of War, Treasury, the AG, and whoever I'm forgetting, right? Secretary of State, the first four, right? Would we really miss the rest? Right? I mean, so but we keep funding it. You keep doing it. You keep saying okay. And we're borrowing money to go fund all of that army of people who are at war with your way of life and who don't want you to live free. As Oliver Anthony said in his songs, right? They want to know what you do. They want to tell you what to do. And that's precisely why they exist and why we shouldn't fund them.
You brought up a very important point, which is the people, right? Eric made this point on a conversation we had with him the other day, which is what happens in a lot of Democratic administrations is that they are political appointees. And then if a Republican wins the White House, what they actually do is they move into career civil service jobs. Yeah. You know, same pay, same level of responsibility. And then a Democrat comes in, they go back into the political side.
Yep.
You've long championed an issue which I think is terribly, terribly underrated that I want this crowd to take away the importance of. That is civil service reform, right? What has to do with this sort of career bureaucrat class in Washington, the federal unions. What is the importance of that? What do we do about making them more accountable, make sure that they know that they work for the president and the American people?
This is something President Trump was trying to do in his administration, and he was doing some of it by executive action, executive order, to change our policies with respect to how you can remove bureaucrats and remove civil servants. So I want to be clear, again, as an AUSA, I worked with an enormous number of patriots who were in the FBI, who were in the ATF, who worked in all these agencies. Almost all of them are going after real bad guys. That was a while back. That was 12, 13 years ago. The numbers are a little different now. I had an FBI agent, an elderly gentleman last night at an event come up, and he had spent his whole life in the FBI, and he basically apologized to me. Look, my dad worked at the IRS, and I don't love the IRS. He grew up, was an auditor and got a job at the IRS, and he was a public servant like 35 years ago. I get it, but civil servants can't be immune from accountability, right? I mean, if you go look at the data about who gets fired, like federal bureaucrats never get fired. Like they just literally never get fired. And if you try to, you run into the buzzsaw of the bureaucracy, and you got to go to this committee and this division and this group, and then they get moved over here, and then lo and behold, you give up and you move on to the next problem. So we introduced legislation that basically makes all federal employees at-will employees. Now, I will tell you, yeah, that's worth applauding. I will tell you that I get some aggravated phone calls from some of the various union organizations, including ones I support. I won't mention their names, but you could guess. I mean, there's some law enforcement groups that I tend to support, and others that go, whoa, hold on a second. At-will employment here. Hang on. And I get it, right? Because they don't want a bunch of leftists coming in and they're trying to go fire basically the good guys who are trying to go do good things and go after actual criminals. And So there are, we ought to be careful about how we do it. And we have some protections in our bill for whistleblowers and so forth. But let's be clear. You got to be able to fire and get rid of these bureaucrats or we're never going to be able to reclaim freedom because, again, they're at war with your way of life. And, people always ask me, back to the spending, because I'm going to bring everything back to spending. Because, again, the power of the purse was given to us. Federalist 58, James Madison spelled it out, that the power of the purse was given to the House of Representatives as the most effective weapon against the tyranny of the executive branch. That's my paraphrase, but that's what he said. And we keep not using it. And it's literally the weapon. It's the one thing we can fully control and not give them the funding. And people always look at me and go, well, Chip, you can't run a defund DOJ campaign. You got to have some aspect of Department of Justice. There's U.S. attorneys and, funding of courts and the FBI, and they're going out, you can't defund them. It's like, well, first of all, don't take the bait that you're saying we're defunding every aspect of the apparatus that we want to have in place to go after bad guys. But if we have to sit around for a few months causing pain at these agencies in order to cause change, good. Like, we're there, folks. We're at the war. We're in the war, okay? And we've got to recognize that we're in a war trying to defend not just this country, but the very existence of freedom. Your freedom is at stake.
We've got a few more minutes. I want to ask you about a trend on the right, which I find very concerning, which is that everyone recognizes what the left is doing with the administrative state. Yeah. There are some voices on the right who say, well, instead of trying to shrink the administrative state, we should do what the left is doing. We should take it, use it as a tool, use it as a weapon to advance our own conservative values. What do you make of that line of thinking? Can conservatives weaponize the administrative state, or should we be focused, as you were saying, of shrinking it and getting it out of our lives?
Yeah, show me the great free societies where you've empowered the administrative and bureaucratic state to the benefit of freedom. Yeah. There ain't one. Doesn't happen. Look, I get in my car, my rental car at this just wonderful airport here in Atlanta, as I'm leaving to come up here to Buckhead, which I'm still remembering the Buckhead of my youth out of college and, coming up to whatever, the $3 cafe and having beers, and now I'm running around Buckhead. Anyway, whatever. I'm just getting distracted. But I get my car and, and it's this rental car and then you change lanes. If it beeps at you and then it's trying to tell you what to do and then it's making noise. Oh no, there's a thing. And then it actually starts letting off the gas and it's like, what are you doing? Like, stop it. And, I joke, but I find that to be extremely problematic. Yeah. They are about to control every aspect of your existence in your life. And I have a Jeep Wrangler. It's like 20-something years old. It's not quite old enough to be free from some electronics, but it's almost free of it. And, the one thing it would do is beep at me if I didn't have my seatbelt on. So I pulled the fuse out so it won't beep at me, right? And so every once in a while, if I'm driving it around and I pull out, it happens if I'm at the airport and park in the parking garage. You pull out of the parking garage, you have your headlights on during the day. I go to some restaurant and meet somebody and leave the headlights on because it doesn't beep at me because the same fuse controls those lights. And I come out and it's dead. Now that's happened like maybe, once or twice a year. It kind of happens probably. And every time I just, my friend who might come over to jumpstart it or something, I say, yeah, that's just the price of freedom. Because I don't like being told what to do. I just don't. I wear my seatbelt, but I wear my seatbelt when I damn well please as a free American. And so look, my point is just this. They literally want to have, whether it's a central, digital currency, whether it's cars that are battery powered with chips in it that they can control when you drive it and how you drive it. In California recently, they were trying to save the grid and the strain of the day by cutting down the charging stations for the cars. Well, I'm sure that's really helpful if you've got to go to your job and you can't charge your car so Californians can preserve their ridiculous energy grid. Yet that's where we're headed. And it ain't just California. Texas is 50% wind and solar, folks. Just yesterday, we were getting warnings because it was a windless day. Guess what happens on a windless day? You need gas. You need nuclear. You need actual reliable power. They don't care. To your question, do you want to empower bureaucrats because you think there's going to be these magical conservative bureaucrats? They're going to come in and grant you freedom? Because guess what? I don't need a conservative bureaucrat to grant me freedom. I'm supposed to just be free. Yeah.
I think the very, very important takeaway is be very, very skeptical. If you hear from a Republican that we're going to have an agency do this, this, and this, and this, and we're going to create new rules, and they sound great as far as the outcome that they're hoping to achieve, if it requires a federal agency to take action, be very, very skeptical of that.
I agree. And if I don't know, we're wrap up stage here. Is that where we are?
I have two more questions.
All right, two more questions. We'll go over your questions.
So one of the things that AFP does and a number of other organizations do is we're taking this message directly to people. This fight is as important as anything that folks are hearing about. What is the importance of grassroots activism, and what role can they play not just in an election cycle, not just in a legislative session, but what role can folks like this do to make a difference and push these ideas forward and push back on bad ideas?
Last night I was in Tyler, as I said, in East Texas. Got to visit my 85-year-old great aunt, and I got to see a picture of my great grandma when she was 18, when she graduated high school in 1926. She's drinking a Coca-Cola bottle. I'd never seen that photo before. And she and I were sitting there and talking. She goes, "Why are you here?" And she's got a little kind of, a little hard of memory and stuff. She goes, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Well, I'm here because, I'm trying to meet with a group there's about 400 or so grassroots activists in Texas." And she goes, well, why do you need to do that? And we were talking, and I just remember, maybe think of like the different era, right? The era of like my parents and my grandparents and our founders. And just America was about America. You didn't question who we were. You didn't have to question who we are as a nation. You believed in America because you believed in the idea of America. The reason the grassroots are important, besides just elections, to answer the question, is because we don't have that now. Just want to be clear, we do not have that now. Multiple generations of an education establishment has corrupted the minds of multiple generations of Americans to not believe in the America we believe in, to not believe in freedom, to not believe that you start created equal, but that nobody deserves special treatment of any race or sex or anything else. They don't even believe that there is man and that there is woman. Like, we are there. So the reason the grassroots are so important is because you have to light a fire under Republicans who campaign on all of these wonderful things and then don't do crap about it. So you have to turn the heat up. When we come in September, we're going to be faced with a decision on September 30th. You've already heard my position. Don't fund the status quo. Hold the line. You all are going to have to be the ones that turn the heat up on each and every one of your representatives to join the fight. I didn't go to Washington for second place. And I just hope you guys will help in that effort, and that's the grassroots fight. That's the whole core of it.
That's perfect. We will wrap with this quick rapid fire. I'll say a word, you give me a word or a sentence or less.
Uh-oh.
Bidenomics.
only slightly worse than weak Republicanomics.
Top issues in the 2024 election. Most important.
Ultimately, freedom. And freedom depends on security, securing our nation, securing our borders, securing our country through a strong military, and reestablishing our economic strength by stopping the spending spree that is destroying our country. And
I'll wrap with this. What does it mean to be an American?
So I'm going to answer this with a slightly longer version, and I can blame Vivek because he came in a little late. Look, I've endorsed Ron DeSantis, and I'll support the Republican nominee, and Vivek's a friend, and I'm glad he's out there part of the conversation. It's great. I just want to say this, because people get cynical and they get negative, and this is going to answer your question. People go, well, where's your hope come from? My hope comes from people like Riley Gaines, who stands up and tells the internet, that's right, yeah, give him a round of applause. There are Americans across the generations who are fed up and who are not taking it anymore. Riley was one of those. She stared down the University of Kentucky and all of the establishment people and all of her generation that said, well, you can't talk about that. And she said, what do you mean I can't talk about that there's man and woman and that I ought to be able to swim and that swimmer is a dude? I can't do that, right? So I am inspired by people like Riley. I'm inspired by Chloe Cole, the young lady that testified in the Judiciary Committee that I was sitting on the dais and I almost broke down in tears while she was describing her detransitioning experience and how she didn't want other kids to experience that. I'm inspired by Scott Smith, who stood up to the school boards in Loudoun County. I'm inspired by Mark Houck, who stood up to the authoritarian bureaucrats in Philadelphia. I'm inspired by the young man that Senator Cruz had at the State of the Union who didn't take a needle in his arm and is now losing his commanding officer's job and having to pay another $100,000 back, but he's standing up and saying, no, I don't think that was right. I'm inspired by the millions of Americans who are standing up right now and saying enough. Parents taking their kids out of broken schools, homeschooling them or moving them to private Christian schools and doing what they need to do or going and challenging and taking over the school boards. We're going to reclaim this country because it is our rightful inheritance as Americans to live free. And by God, we ought to live free. And there are people standing up to do that. And you guys are here for that purpose. Thanks to Erick, thanks to you guys, and thanks to all of you for being here.
Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Chip Roy.
Thank you. Amen.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
This is good. All right. That's you. Good. Thanks, guys.